really ignored by so many people. People don't realize what a large impact our sleep deprivation has on every aspect of our mental health and physical health and well-being. Yes?
Do you find, because I find this, that it's almost as if you sleep, if you get enough sleep, then you're not doing a good job at your office, or you're not, is that mine?
No, I think
Oh.
it's mine. I think it's mine.
Then
I
you're,
thought I turned it off.
yeah, I have my thing on silent.
Sorry.
That's all right.
No way.
I did turn it off.
If you sleep enough, then you're not a good parent. If you
Right.
sleep enough, then you're not putting in enough, like, that's the thing I get, because I have people say, oh, I didn't sleep last night because of my kid, and oh, I didn't sleep, I don't sleep because of my job, and what do you, like, I'm obviously, I'm sure you'll address that, but I feel like, because it's developed nations, that's probably the epidemic, right? Like,
It's
I
a
feel
big
guilty.
part of it.
When
It's
I get a lot of sleep, I feel guilty.
Right. Like you must be lazy, or you
Right.
must not
oh,
be
it's because
productive
I'm single and I
enough.
don't have kids, that's why I can get a lot of sleep, like,
Right,
and
or
I
you
thought-
don't have enough responsibility, then somehow we have really devalued sleep. Imagine, I mean, up until not very long ago, a siesta was part of the day-to-day life of many, many, many different populations. And that, of course, is something that has really faded in our culture, even in European cultures, it's faded as a result of this psychology around the fact that somehow sleep is at odds with our productivity.
Mhm.
Now, some of the other reasons why sleep has become an epidemic is because there's been an enormous amount of change that has happened in the last 100 years. Now, the biggest impacts on our sleep have been the invention of the light bulb, I think about 100 years ago, maybe a little bit more. The light bulb was invented, and of course, the minute the light bulb was invented, our whole circadian rhythm, our relationship to light and dark, which very much informs our physiological response to day and night, to being awake and energized and being able to calm and sleep, became interrupted. So we no longer had to go to bed at 8:30 when it got dark, particularly in the summer months, but we could stay up until 9 or 10 or 11, and then slowly that started to chip away at sort of on a macro level at the amount of sleep. So before the invention of the light bulb, human beings were getting around 10 hours of sleep a night on average, and oftentimes they would also take a nap. Now, about 50 years after that, the television was invented, and of course along with the television, slowly afterwards came things like late night TV. So then, here we are, not only can we stay awake because we can keep the lights on, but we can be entertained until all hours of the night. So very quickly, after the light bulb had been invented, we went from about 10 hours until being, more of like a 7 to 9 hour sleep window that people were using. And then when the television was invented, we lost another hour or two of sleep as a nation, and that average went down to more like 6 to 8 hours a night of sleep, which kind of was considered normal. But really, relative to what had been happening for thousands of years, like actually for 3 million years of evolution, in the last 100 years, there were these major disruptions. And then, of course, in the last decade, has come the iPad and the iPhone and the laptop. So not only can we watch late night television until all hours of the night, now we can actually choose exactly what we're watching and watch anything we want at any hour of the day or night and self-select, so we are never left to sort of sit with ourselves and be with ourselves, and this is very overstimulating. Now, I give a lot of talks in the corporate setting. And when I go into the corporate setting, oftentimes I'm talking to, rooms of people between the ages of 22 and 40, sort of a young millennial population. And these kids are getting 4 to 6 hours a night of sleep. 4 to 6 hours of sleep a night, literally 4 to 6 hours of sleep. Now, they wonder why they're suffering. They wonder why they're dealing with anxiety or depression or different kinds of health issues and issues around their creativity or their productivity. And oftentimes, and the reason why this is called a silent epidemic is because they don't associate their problems with this chronic sleep deprivation. They think it has to do with, I don't like my job, I don't like my partner, I don't like this, I don't like that. A million other reasons, except for the fact that they are incredibly sleep deprived and their bodies and their minds are therefore not able to function optimally. Now, we know that every animal species on the planet sleeps and most of them nap. And we are animals. But we have completely deserted those natural instincts, those natural circadian rhythms, and traded them in for productivity and for overstimulation, resulting in just a host of challenges. Now, why do we get insomnia other than these reasons, right? So our relationship to light and dark is one of the major reasons that I'm talking about in terms of the light bulb and the television and the computer. However, we all know that there's other causes of sleep deprivation as well. And we know that worry, anxiety is a big one. And some of the other major causes in addition to this circadian rhythm disruption are depression, so mood issues, anxiety disorders, asthma, pain and arthritis, and all different kinds of reactions to medications, particularly some cardiac medications can really be disruptive to our sleep. And we know that caffeine and nicotine and alcohol and certain other pharmaceuticals can be overstimulating to us as well. But what happens is that it becomes a cycle, a vicious cycle, right? So we're sleep deprived and we're not feeling so well, and maybe we're struggling with some anxiety, maybe we're struggling with some depression, maybe as a result we start to eat foods that aren't so healthy, and then as a result we start to develop some inflammation in our bodies, and then as a result of the inflammation in our bodies we start to get a little uncomfortable in our bodies, and we have some pain, and then that pain further disrupts our sleep, and so we end up in this vicious cycle around kind of our sleep deprivation, the challenges that occur as a result of the sleep deprivation, and then also impact our sleep. And it's a cycle that can be very, very difficult for people to break out of, particularly if they're not really able to identify that core reason that they're not sleeping enough. So any questions so far based on that?
Does a nap interfere with sleep?
Great question. So no, a nap, as long as you take a nap before 3 o'clock in the afternoon, research says that it will not interfere with your sleep. In fact, our bodies learn through practice how to calm down and fall asleep. And so oftentimes, again, when I'm talking to executives in the corporate setting, part of what is happening is that they're going go, 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 go all day long. And then when it's time to calm down and go to sleep, they don't know how to calm down. They don't have any practice in what's called down-regulating their nervous system. So in order to fall asleep, we need to down-regulate our nervous system so we're not in this doing mode, but we can go into a resting mode. And if we don't slow down all day long, then getting ourselves to calm down and slow down in the evening is much harder because we just haven't had any practice. Picture going 100 miles an hour on the highway and then being asked to stop and go to sleep, right? So that's what's happening to people. They're going 100 miles an hour and then they can't stop. However, if they were going, 50 miles an hour and they stopped every few miles, then ultimately stopping at the end of the day would be less of a challenge for them. They will have been practiced at that, and they will not have built up so much momentum that they can't slow down. Hello and welcome. You made it through the rain.
I was late.
I thought this was really interesting. So we know that research has shown that just a single hour of lost sleep on a global scale, so they look at this in terms of daylight savings times, that this can result in spikes in heart attacks and traffic accidents. So they've watched the trends over the years to see what happens. And they also know that conversely, when we fall back, when we do the opposite, that heart attacks and traffic accidents happen less. And so, really on this kind of national scale, it's really powerful to see what even one less hour of sleep tonight on a global scale can do to our overall health and our ability to function safely in the world. In fact, there's quite a lot of research around this increase in traffic accidents. And I kind of, when I was putting together this presentation, I fell down what I call a rabbit hole when I was researching that, because I found that to be fascinating. Really? People are getting in more car accidents just after daylight savings time? And it was unbelievable what I found in terms of that. So, according to the research, we are best with about 7 to 9 hours of sleep a night. So that's the optimal amount of sleep. That's why oftentimes people say, 8 hours of sleep, right? Because that's a good rule of thumb, it's a good average. We know that ideally we're waking up without an alarm clock in the mornings. That if we are able to wake up without an alarm clock in time for whatever our responsibilities are, the chances are we're going to bed at the right time. So for me, it's a challenge. I have 3 children, I work full time, so for me to get to bed by 9 o'clock, 9:30, which is probably the right time for me to be able to wake up at around 6 or so without an alarm clock, is a challenge. And and that is a very, very, very common theme, particularly for people through midlife, where they're working a lot, they may be juggling parents or children or other responsibilities, and this becomes very, very difficult to get to bed on time. We know that there have been some research studies to say that people over the age of 65, that seniors, could get away with a little bit of less sleep than 7 to 9 hours. Now, I think that it can kind of go both ways, because I think, yes, if you are the picture of health and you are over the age of 65 and you exercise and you have all of these, and you eat healthy and you have all these routines in place, yes, maybe you can get away with a little bit less. But I think that oftentimes when we are over the age of 65, we're managing some health issues, some other issues that that maybe have crept up on us through the years, and as a result of that, our need for sleep, our need to enable our bodies to rest and restore is, kind of that sort of balances out that question mark of, well, can I get away with less sleep because I'm older? Because we know that when we are getting enough sleep, it enables our immune function to be exponentially better. I mean, it's again, I fell down the rabbit hole of research and learned that the impact of sleep on our immune system is really, really, really profound. Now,
Why
go
do
ahead.
they say that seniors need less? If you're giving reasons to support why they shouldn't have less for their immune system, what was the basis of them making that assumption, seniors need less?
That's a really, really good question, and there was a lot of different information about that. And some said that basically, partially it's because and I think ultimately what I learned is that it's, that oftentimes seniors have less demanding days than people who are, in their prime of their midlife, where they're juggling a lot of things, and therefore the level of exertion is less, so there's more opportunity. there's more opportunity for sort of a natural rest and restore to happen throughout the course of the day. And we don't need to sort of fuel up on quite enough sleep as seniors to get through our day in a productive and healthy way. So that really wasn't enough for me. I didn't buy it completely, and I couldn't find a lot of medical information as to why one might say, oh, seniors need less sleep. And a part of it, to me, sounded a little bit like, well, maybe seniors have trouble having sleep, so maybe it's just easier to tell them, oh, you can get away with a little less, it's no big deal. And so that's why I'm a little bit of a skeptic when it comes to that. And to me, all of the other information that I learned, which was very much around how powerful sleep is in terms of our immune system and managing a multitude of chronic diseases and other issues, to me, really made me think, I beg to differ, but let's talk about it. Let's talk about it as a group. I'm curious, do the seniors in this room feel that they require less sleep today than you did when you were 45?
No.
Well,
Right.
I've always required a little sleep, 6.5 hours, whether I was 45 or 75. So I shouldn't be alive now.
Right,
Based
right,
on
well,
what they say is the importance of sleep, I should not have lived this long.
I think that's an interesting piece of information, and I think that, and I believe that, a lot of what we're talking about is sort of general guidelines, and that there are certainly a lot of individual nuances. Now, what could affect these individual nuances? Well, your stress levels,
Right.
If you have a huge, amount of stress throughout your life, then perhaps that sleep deprivation, or the need for that sleep to really rest and restore is more important versus if you manage your stress well and you don't require that same level of recovery after the course of a day. But I think that there are a lot of variables. I think diet is a big variable in kind of how things get flushed out in the wash in terms of our needs around sleep. So I do think it's important to note that we really are all very different and all very individual, and taking into consideration what feels best for us is really important. Now, according to the research, it says that if we are not getting enough sleep, that we are at an increased risk for getting infections and picking up things like viruses. We know that there's research that ties long-term sleep deprivation to diseases like cancer, heart disease, diabetes, and even Alzheimer's. We know that when we don't get enough sleep, our hormones get disrupted, which the result of that is that oftentimes we have an increased appetite when our hormones are disrupted, and that this can cause weight gain and other issues that then kind of further put us in that difficult cycle. We know that people who are having sleep deprivation and are really feeling kind of chronically tired are at greater risk of developing chronic depression and anxiety. And we know that it compromises our cognitive abilities and our executive functioning and our learning and our memory. And of course, as I mentioned before, it increases our risk in car accidents. Now, one of the things that I think can be really interesting to think about when we look at this is if any of you are parents and you've parented a little one, or even a not so little one, who doesn't get enough sleep on a regular basis. So I have 3 kids. I have a 15-year-old, I have a 13-year-old, and then I have an 11-year-old. And I know that when my kids are not getting good sleep, and this happened over the course of the lockdown during the pandemic, because they were so overstimulated on their devices, because my husband and I were working and trying to kind of keep our business alive, and my children, who are kind of in that preteen and teenage years, were trying to figure out online school and things like that, and their whole cycle got completely and totally out of whack, and they really weren't sleeping enough. And one of the things that I noticed is that they were anxious. I mean, there were other variables, but the anxiety, those feelings of sadness, of depression, just a general crankiness, anyone knows that if you've parented little kids, if they don't get enough sleep, of course they're coming home with drippy noses and they're tired and they're picking up viruses and they're picking up the colds at school and preschool and things like that. And so sometimes I find that if we think about children under these circumstances, like people wonder, for example, if they eat really low quality food all day long or consume a ton of sugar and soda and things like that, why they don't feel so great, why they're cranky, why they're moody, why, all of these things. Well, if you look at your child and you were to feed your child that all day long and someone would say, oh, why is your child acting that way? You'd say, oh, they just ate sugar all day long and they barely slept last night, right? And so we can see it when we look at little children, but we oftentimes forget as we get older and we move through the life cycle that those exact same things that impact our children's behavior, their ability to learn, their ability to think, their ability to function in school properly, the same thing happens to us as adults. We just have a little bit more self-control and we maybe don't expose it to such a degree as our children do in those kinds of situations. So, now that we've clearly understood the problem, right? So that was all about the problem of this silent sleep epidemic in our world. We know that there are 4 major pillars that support our overall well-being, our mental health, and our physical health and well-being. And these exact same pillars are also directly connected to our sleep health. Now, these 4 pillars are movement, stillness, connection, and nourishment. Now, again, to go back to thinking about our little ones and children, we know that when we're a parent and we look at our little, 1-year-old or baby, let's say we have a baby. We know that that baby needs tummy time, right? They need to move, they need a little exercise. We know that they need to have their naps and they need to get like 11 or 12 hours of sleep a night. We know that they need to eat, plenty of sweet potatoes and avocados and nourishing food. And we know that they need to be held, they need to be touched, they need to be talked to. And that barring any other major issues, health issues or developmental issues, if these 4 major pillars are present in our baby's life, that baby will thrive. Well, guess what? We're just big babies. We are literally just big babies. And so we need these exact same 4 pillars that our babies need to thrive. And it's these exact same 4 pillars that enable our babies to sleep well and also enable us to sleep well as big babies. Now, in terms of movement, the idea is that if we can move vigorously early in the day, in the morning, before noon, preferably outside in the sunlight, with sunscreen on, of course, that is the ideal way to express movement in terms of our sleep cycle. Now, moving in the afternoon is also okay, but if we move too close to bedtime, it heats up our body, and our bodies actually don't do well to be that warm at night. We want to stay nice and cool at night, and we're going to get on to that soon, but it can be overstimulating to the system and too warming to our bodies to exercise later in the day. So ideally we're exercising early in the day, and can you imagine why exercising outdoors is better for sleep?
Sure, the oxygen is better, oxygen intake.
Absolutely. So that's the taking in the quality of fresh air is a big reason. Also the sunlight helps to sort of regulate our circadian rhythm so that our bodies know, okay, it's morning, it's daytime, I'm supposed to be up and energized right now. Now, the other thing that movement does is that it helps us do what's called complete the stress cycle. So, are you guys familiar with the fight or flight response?
Mm-hmm.
So when the fight or flight response happens, as you know, it releases all kinds of hormones in our bodies. And if we are not running from a saber-toothed tiger, those hormones can become toxic to our body because they're really meant to put us into action. They're meant to help us escape danger. They're meant to help us really survive. They're survival hormones. But if we're just sitting on the phone talking to our child and we're getting very stressed out about it, or a friend or whomever, a partner, or we're doing our work, then that stress, those hormones that are building up in our bodies, have nowhere to go. They have no release. So they just build up and build up and build up, and that's why people get sick. One of the reasons why people get sick. Now, we know that movement helps complete the stress cycle. It really enables us to move those fight or flight hormones through our body in a way that can really be a relief and a release in terms of that toxic load. The second pillar is stillness. And we're going to talk more about all of these in a moment, but it's really about having strategies to calm the mind. And in many cases, it's really about being able to kind of land in the present moment, because we all know that worry and anxiety is a big cause of insomnia. So the more we can train our brain to have certain practices and calming strategies, particularly before bed, the better off we are. Again, think of our children. We need to lie in bed, we need to read them a book, we need these calming routines to help them down-regulate their nervous system and prepare for sleep. Go ahead.
Sorry.
No, you're good.
So I know, like, you know, it's not good to be on your phone or to be on the computer before you go to bed. So for adults, I've heard that it's also good to be reading or doing like a crossword puzzle. Nothing that's got all that stimulation and the lights. Is that true?
That is 100% true, and we're going to talk more about it. So
Cool.
reading a good old-fashioned paper book is one of the absolute best things that you can do right before bed. And really, you know, ditching this, putting this away in a drawer, plugged in, where we don't see it, think about it, get tempted by it, because even if we're lying down, the stimulation of not only what's happening on the screen, but the light that comes from this screen is very, very disruptive to our circadian rhythm, and is overstimulating just in general in terms of our mind, and you know, calming and down-regulating. Now, we also know that eating a healthy diet also very much impacts our overall ability to regulate from a systemic perspective. So being mindful of, you know, I love to enjoy dessert, but is having that rich, creamy treat better off after lunch as opposed to after dinner? Maybe after dinner, I could choose a cup of chamomile tea or a little bit of honey. Maybe I don't need to load up on sugar just a couple of hours before I'm going to be trying to calm down. We also know that eating a healthy diet helps with that hormone regulation, and as I mentioned, sleep and our hormones are very tied together. So we know that women, when they're going through menopause, oftentimes struggle with insomnia. This is a very, very, very common complaint in mid-age for women. And the reason is because our hormones and our sleep are very, very interrelated. Now, the last thing before we kind of go a little bit deeper and take a moment to just answer any questions is really about connection. So, human beings are wired to be connected. We feel safe when we are in community. We feel safe when we know we have other people around us. That goes back millions of years. When you were when your ancestors were part of whatever tribe they were a part of, and you know, they really and truly were safer together. It was not safe to be alone, you know, millions of years ago. We needed each other for survival. So therefore, we are wired to be able to down-regulate and calm down when we feel connected to others. In fact, you know, oftentimes little children need to be held or cuddled right before bed. And what we know is physical touch actually stimulates the vagus nerve. And the vagus nerve down-regulates our nervous system and calms us down. Now, if we don't have anybody to snuggle with, it's still okay. But even just an authentic conversation with somebody that we care for, even if it's over the phone, that can be very, very calming to our nervous system and really help to make the kind of animal instinct in us feel safe and ready to down-regulate. So, any questions on all
Yes,
that?
I've never heard ventral vagus nerve. I have no idea what that is.
Yes, so that's, I'm so glad you asked, and it's really, it's a deep and complicated topic that I'm not gonna fully go into right now because it would kind of take over, but the vagus nerve is part of our nervous system, and there are points throughout the body that are related to that vagus nerve and can help to calm and sort of, calm is not quite the right word, but help to stimulate it's actually, you stimulate the vagus nerve, and the vagus nerve itself is the part of our nervous system that helps us to down-regulate, to go into that rest and restore position. And there's actually spots in our body. Just today, I learned a fun fact that if we actually relax our lower jaw, that stimulates the vagus nerve. That there are certain just pressure points and physiological functions within the body that help to stimulate that aspect of our nervous system to put us into that rest and restore. So again, it's complicated. I could do an entire presentation just on the vagus nerve, so I'm just kind of doing these broad strokes in terms of its relationship to sleep. But what we do know about the vagus nerve is that when we experience physical touch, that aspect of the vagus nerve, that aspect of our nervous system is stimulated, as well as certain pressure points. There's a pressure point in the tops of the ears that stimulates the vagus nerve. So sometimes we put a little pressure point up here. And you know, something fun to Google when you get home is, you know, how do I stimulate my central vagus nerve? And you'll have all different kinds of interesting information. You could fall down the vagus nerve rabbit hole, but once you start learning about the vagus nerve, it's fascinating, and you can start experimenting. This also stimulates the vagus nerve.
Right, like the shot, like in yoga when
Mhm.
yeah.
Yes. Now, to take a little minute to sort of unpack some of these ideas a little bit more. So as I mentioned, the physical movement helps us to complete the stress cycle, which is very, very, very important. We also know that when we actually can exert some energy throughout the day, because daytime is meant to be when we're most active, that will leave our body more prepared for sleep, because quite frankly, we'll just be tireder. So sometimes I notice that when I spend all day sitting at my desk, if I don't exercise and I don't kind of have that sense of release, that it's very, very hard for me to kind of come out of that overstimulated space, that I need to exert some energy in order to release the stress response and calm down. Now, ideally, we like to shoot for about 30 minutes of movement a day. 30 minutes is what is recommended if you look at a lot of the studies. If we can exercise for 30 minutes a day, we can check a lot of boxes in terms of what we're preventing. And the amazing thing is that the research, there's a lot of equivalent research in terms of the different types of movement. So, for example, you know, if it's 30 minutes of cardiovascular movement, that's great. If it's 30 minutes of strength, that's great. If it's 30 minutes of more of a mind-body movement, like a yoga, that's also great. So there's, people say, well, what's the best kind of movement for me to practice? Ideally, we're practicing a variety of those 3 different types of movement because there are some nuances in how they affect us. Obviously, strength training is gonna make us stronger, whereas, if we don't practice any strength training, we're not gonna develop that same level of muscular strength. So ideally, we're rotating in terms of our movement practices between cardiovascular movement, strength-based movement, and mind-body-based movement. Now, mind-body-based movement can also be strengthening, like something like Pilates, but the definition of a mind-body movement would be when we're connecting our breath to our movement and we're very, very focused on what we're doing. So for example, you can get cardiovascular exercise and watch the news at the same time, or listen to a podcast, but you can't really do yoga and watch the news at the same time. It's because it really requires the focus of your mind and your body in a full way. So ideally we're getting about 30 minutes of exercise a day, and we're rotating through these different types of exercise. But what's even more important than that? Doing what we enjoy. Because if we don't do what we enjoy, then we won't do it consistently. And above all, consistency, creating routine and habit is the most important. So if we do a little cardio, a little strength training, a little mind-body movement, and it's very random and it's kind of once in a while when we feel inspired or we feel in the mood, it's actually not going to do a whole lot. Might make us feel better that day, which is worth it, but when we talk about the benefits of exercise and movement, it really comes down to consistency. And what I know after coaching people for 20 years around health and wellness is that in order to be consistent, we really need to like what we're doing. It's very hard to be consistent with something that you really don't enjoy. So I always say to people, first and foremost, think about what you actually would enjoy doing on a regular basis and figure out how you can fit 30 minutes of that into your day. So any questions? Do you guys notice that when you move during the day that your sleep is better? You haven't noticed it in particular.
No, but I've been consistent with the things you're talking about and I still don't sleep.
You still don't sleep. So is there anything that you're noticing that you think, maybe that's aggravating my sleep?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay, we'll see if we can
That's
get
why I
there.
asked you what that target thing was.
Right, the vagus nerve. Right. Now, and let's put a pin in that because we're going to talk a little bit about some points that we can stimulate for you at the end that might be helpful. Now, interestingly, there are a variety of foods that can really support sleep. And we've all heard about turkey, right? Everybody goes to sleep on Thanksgiving because it has tryptophan in it. But we know that, for example, sometimes late at night we get the munchies and we wanna snack on foods. And we know that walnuts and almonds are loaded with melatonin. So melatonin, we were just talking about this before, Peter and I, melatonin is a very, very effective sleep chemical, or hormone. It is naturally released in our body. Interestingly, my kids weren't the only one having sleep issues through the pandemic because melatonin was like sold out globally. I mean, you couldn't even get it on Amazon. It was impossible to find melatonin because everybody was struggling. So a really natural way and a great snack to have late at night are some walnuts or some almonds. Of course, turkey also has tryptophan in it. Chamomile tea has been clinically proven to be calming. So, for example, taking a small bowl of walnuts and almonds and having that with a cup of chamomile tea and creating a ritual like that could be a really sweet way to downregulate our nervous system and practice calming down before bed. Now, serotonin is also very calming to the brain and supports sleep, and kiwi has serotonin in it. Tart cherry juice is loaded with melatonin as well. Fatty fish has serotonin. And one of my personal favorite sleep tools are essential oils. Has anybody here ever played around with essential oils at all, like lavender oil or, yeah. So the essential oils can be very, very calming, and there are a lot of ways to use essential oils. You can use them in a diffuser. You can put certain oils, not all oils, directly onto the skin via like a roller or something like that. Those are my two favorite ways to use essential oils, but lavender oil, even chamomile oil I have. There's an oil called clary sage essential oil is very, very calming. There's also an essential oil called vetiver, which is very, it can be deeply calming. In fact, when my 11-year-old daughter has trouble sleeping, sometimes I'll take a little bit of vetiver essential oil, which is very thick and kind of, it's thick and it has a strong smell. It's not for everybody. If I put a little vetiver on the soles of her feet, she falls right to sleep. And so sometimes we can find, as I mentioned at the beginning of this conversation, sometimes really small little practices can be very, very supportive and very nourishing to our sleep cycle. And my recommendation around these types of practices are to create ritual around them. Much like we do with our little children, when we put them to bed, they have what do we call a dinner bath bed, and then, or dinner bath booked bed, or whatever your routine is, and that's what puts the little ones to sleep. We also need a bedtime routine that could look like a bath, and a cup of chamomile tea, and a small snack, and maybe some diffusion of some essential oils, or putting them on our skin if we're comfortable with that, diffusing some lavender on our nightstand. All of those practices can be very, very supportive. As I mentioned before, meaningful connection before bed is important. So, sometimes as I mentioned, if we don't have anybody to physically connect with, creating intention around closing the end of our day, not necessarily zoning out to television or the news, but to talk to somebody that we really care for. And to try to create some bit of a ritual around that can also be very, very, very powerful. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning, I've been teaching meditation and yoga for many, 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 many years. And we know that meditation is another very, very powerful sleep tool. There are many different forms of meditation, and I can't tell you how often I hear, I tried meditation and I can't do it, or it's not for me, or I was like ready to jump out the window, I really couldn't do it. And oftentimes what I say in response to that is there are many, many, many different types of meditation. And perhaps the type of meditation that you tried really wasn't quite the right type for you, but are you able to develop an attitude of curiosity around it to try to explore? Now, there's an application called Insight Timer. So if you're at all interested in this, write this down, Insight Timer. Insight Timer is an amazing application because it has every possible kind of meditation you could ever want. And you can play this on your phone right before bed and test out different types of meditation. Now, I recently went to Los Angeles over the 4th of July, just this last weekend, and I was staying with a friend and I was having a lot of trouble falling asleep. And I put on Insight Timer, and I decided to explore a little bit because I was curious to see what I could find in the sleep category. And I ended up finding a meditation that was really, it was like music, but it wasn't really music, it was sounds. It was very, very calming sounds. And I thought, I wonder if this will work, I'll try this. And I put on those calming sounds, and at first I'm thinking, this isn't gonna work, this isn't gonna work, this isn't gonna work, and then lo and behold, I ended up slipping into sleep as a result of these sounds and the way that they impacted my brain. Because that was the intention behind this type of meditation. So breath work is a type of practice, and we're gonna actually practice together in a moment. And for those of us who, maybe meditation and breathing isn't our thing, oftentimes if a lot of thinking, a lot of worrying is keeping up at night, keeping a journal on our nightstand to really take a moment to just offload some of those thoughts, to put them down on paper and think, these will be there for me in the morning. All of these worries are not going anywhere, but can I just put them down on paper and express them? And will that help me kind of unload for just a moment? And progressive muscle relaxation is a part of this category, but I wanted to take a moment just to speak to it separately because it's really a body-based meditation. Are any of you familiar with that practice?
We do it in yoga sometimes, in corpse pose.
Exactly. It's called a yoga nidra. Yoga nidra is like a yogic sleep. And really what it is when you are guided through the body to tense and release all the different aspects, or all the different parts of your body. And just by nature of doing that, you're able to really, it's another way to kind of process that stress cycle, to let the stress move through your body. You're tensing and then you're releasing it, and you're kind of getting it out of your system. And it also, just by nature of going through the body and tensing and releasing, it takes your mind off of all the other things that you're thinking about and doing, because you're focusing on the specific activity of tensing and releasing the different areas of your body. Now, you can find wonderful yoga nidra practices on Insight Timer. The greatest thing about Insight Timer is that it's basically free, unless you get some sort of upgraded membership, which you probably don't need. So, I'm going to take a moment to guide us through sort of a brief breathing practice before we move on, but any other questions on that? Oh, we're almost out of time.
How long does what's the ideal amount of time for meditation in general? Like an hour, 30 minutes, 15, to really get the benefits of it?
Yeah, so again, if you ask kind of the sages, the meditation teachers, they would say 20 minutes is the right length for meditation. However, as we talked about before, my friend, you know, if we don't have time for 20 minutes, 2 minutes will do just fine. So, you know, we don't want to be perfection to be the enemy of actually just doing it and exploring it. And so if you think, I think I could probably tolerate a 2 minute or a 5 minute meditation on a nightly basis as part of my routine, then I say go for that. If you think I can do 20 minutes, that's amazing. But the more you can build it into routine, into ritual, in a very realistic and consistent way, that's when you're actually gonna see the biggest effects. Because meditation, when you practice it regularly, you're really able to, you get better at it, and you can drop in to that more present, relaxed state much more easily, as opposed to if you're doing it kind of randomly.
Like the random 20 minutes as opposed to consistently every day.
I'd say consistent 5 minutes is better than random 20 minutes, is my 2 cents on that. Now, we touched on this a little bit earlier, but 90% of Americans use a digital device at least within an hour of bed, and most of them have it in bed. So, show of hands, how many of us take our devices in bed? I used to, up until a couple of years ago when, you know, I really sort of got into this whole sleep expert thing and realized that I needed to get control over that habit and that it was very, very, very overstimulating. Now, I would say in a younger demographic, so you're probably the youngest person here, that every hand would be up.
What if
know,
you're
it-
working late? Because sometimes I work late, you know, and I'm with students or I'm doing work late and I can't not be on it.
Right,
I
so the
guess.
question is sort of,
How do I schedule to make sure?
how do you schedule so that you know that you have an hour? Now, we know that the light of our iPads impacts the release of melatonin. That's why we got so messed up with our circadian rhythms with the invention of the light bulb and the television, etc., that light is overstimulating to us. And we know that reading paper books is ideal. Now, I love this concept of a digital sunset, specifically for you, but this is for all of us too, because even if you don't take your device into bed, that doesn't mean that you're not on screens or devices right up until very close to bedtime. And really what the highest performers kind of in the health and wellness space talk a lot about is getting rid of your devices at least a few hours before bed. Plugging them in the bathroom, in the kitchen, 1 to 2 hours before bed at least. Some people say, you know, after dinner time, no more, that it's like a workday thing or it's a daytime thing. And once the sun sets, the digital devices should also go to sleep. But I think, to be realistic, figuring out what's a manageable buffer for you where you can commit to plugging in your devices and not having that overstimulation of the light.
Sorry about that.
No worries. Now,
Flat warning.
another factor is our environment. So ideally our rooms are 65 to 68 degrees. This was news to me. I used to set my thermostat for like 70, 72. I like warm spaces. But what I learned is that ideally our bodies get very cool at night and that's how we sleep best. Again, going back to sort of our 3 million years of evolution, if we're sleeping in tents, you know, wherever, it's cool at night. And our bodies were actually built for that. And oftentimes being too warm is really a disruptor. The other disruptor is light. So if you don't have room darkening shades, which can be kind of pricey, Home Depot sells black construction paper. And you can actually just cut out a piece of black construction paper, it's almost like cardboard, that you could slip right into your window to keep it dark in your room. Because when the light starts pouring in, that naturally disrupts our circadian rhythm, and it really, when we can darken our room, it really prevents that melatonin disruption that can be so hard on our bodies. So, I just wanted to stick this in there. So the National Institute of Health, I was curious to see if their recommendations were in alignment with my recommendations. So I just smacked them up here on a slide so everybody could see what the National Institute of Health says. And they say, stick to a sleep schedule, daily exercise but not too late, avoid caffeine and nicotine, avoid alcohol before bed. We all know that alcohol disrupts our sleep. Avoid large meals and beverages late at night, avoid medications that delay or disrupt sleep. So if you take regular medication and you're having trouble sleeping, it's worth talking to your doctor or doing a little bit of research as to whether or not that could be a factor. Because I know people who have struggled with years and years of insomnia only to find that it's a side effect of something and that they never really knew that. Not napping too late in the day, finding that relaxation before bed, taking a hot shower before bed, again, that kind of ties into the routine. Creating a soothing sleep environment. Is your bedroom comfortable for you? Have you made it feel like a nice place to be? Have you made it feel homey and cozy? Have you given it that attention? Are there, even putting a picture of someone that you love on your nightstand can help stimulate that vagus nerve to remind you that you are connected. And of course, using sun exposure strategically. They say that we should get at least 30 minutes of sun exposure as long as we have sunblock or a hat on every single day. So, we started a little bit late, so I kind of wanted to run through that at the end, and I'm sorry that we're 5 or 6 minutes after 6 o'clock. I was hoping to have time to guide us through a breathing practice, but I really want to be mindful of everybody's time. So, what do we think? Should we do a brief one, a quickie? Quick practice?
I'm gonna leave, yeah,
Okay.
but I do have a question.
Yeah.
But continue your thought.
I'm happy to just, I think we'll just end with like a 1-minute breathing practice.
That's good.
Okay,
good.
perfect.
My question is, you didn't elaborate on what serotonin is. You spent considerable amount of time on melatonin. What is serotonin?
Serotonin is also a hormone that is, and a chemical that is released in the brain. And in order to have sort of a balanced state in our brain, we need to have a very balanced release of what's called serotonin and dopamine. So when people are struggling with mental health issues, and almost every antidepressant or anti-anxiety medication on the market does something to alter our levels of dopamine and serotonin. So it's a chemical in our brain that helps to really regulate our level of anxiety, our level of depression, our state of equilibrium. So when our serotonin is disrupted, our entire equilibrium in our brain, our state of balance is off kilter. And so oftentimes we don't have enough serotonin in our brain, and so we want these foods that have serotonin because serotonin is naturally a very calming chemical. So for example, if I'm on an anti-anxiety medication, chances are it's gonna have a lot of serotonin in it. And so there are foods that naturally have a lot of serotonin that also help to calm and downregulate the nervous
Is that the
system.
only way, or is light with melatonin and other things stimulating melatonin? What stimulates, besides food, the serotonin?
That's a really good question. I'd have to do a little more research.
I just wondered, I was trying to draw
Yeah.
parallels. between
Yeah,
what you
that's a
said.
really good question as to how, other ways to naturally stimulate
Just food
serotonin.
so far.
Doesn't exercise or no, it stimulates endorphins, that's what.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. I'm gonna take off.
Okay, thank you so much.
Bye,
Thank you for
everyone.
joining us.
Take care.
So, briefly, I just wanted to do an example of this 4-count breath, where we inhale to the count of 4, it's called box breath. We hold for 4, we exhale to the count of 4, and then we sort of hold our breath out for 4, meaning that we sort of stay empty, and then we inhale again. So we'll just go through a few rounds as a test. And there are many different types of breath work. This is only one, and so again, similar to meditation, if this doesn't feel quite right for you, that doesn't mean that breath work isn't for you, it just means that you might need a different breathing technique. So, just taking a moment to take our hands to our lap, and let's close our eyes for a second, just so we can draw the gaze in. Before we alter or manipulate the breath, see if you can notice the natural ebb and flow of your breath, the rise and fall of your chest and your belly. Without trying to change or alter anything quite yet, just noticing the coolness of the air as you breathe in, and the warmth of the air as you breathe out. And when you're ready, we are going to inhale to the count of 4, and we're gonna hold the breath. We are gonna exhale to the count of 4, and then we're gonna hold the breath out just in that empty state. And then we're gonna do it all over again. So together, inhaling for 2, 3, 4, hold it, 2, 3, 4, exhaling, 2, 3, 4, stay empty, 2, 3, 4, inhaling, 2, 3, 4, hold it, 2, 3, 4, exhaling, 2, 3, 4, hold it, 3, 4. Holding. Inhaling. Hold it. Exhaling. Inhaling, one more round. Hold it. Exhaling. Returning to a normal resting breath. Allow your eyes to gently open if they're closed. So, breath work can be a very, very powerful tool. I think breath work is hard to guide because I think people have to sort of pay attention to their own natural rhythms. So even if I just took you through a couple rounds there, if it was hard to sync up, I would encourage you to play with it on your own and see how it feels just lying in bed, to take one hand on your chest and one hand on your belly and close your eyes. And you can play around with that box breath. Sometimes a visual, you can just literally visualize it like a box. Inhaling, hold, exhaling, hold. Or an alternative, which you can play with, would be to inhale to the count of 4 or 5 or even 6, and then to elongate the exhalation to be 2 or 3 counts longer than the inhalation. So when we exhale, the longer our exhalation, that helps to downregulate the nervous system. So, yes.
Does it matter if it's nasal or mouth breathing?
Ideally it's nasal.
Nasal.
Ideally it's nasal.
Okay.
Yes. Any other questions on that?
Thank you
Great.
Thank
so
you
much.
so
Thank you.
much,
Namaste.
everybody.
Thank you.
So
Thank
happy
you.
to have the opportunity